Thank you, everyone. So yeah, this is like, I think the fifth time I've done this one now. This is like the final talk of like the whole tour of everything, so no pressure, right? So yeah, just a little more intro about myself. I've been doing data engineering for since 2013, right when everyone was like fighting like Java MapReduce and Hive and Hadoop and Uzi and all those technologies that we all hate now. Anyways, I'm going to be going over how I built a data platform that thousands of engineers use. Yeah, should be pretty good. We're going to start this off with a quote. So there's a quote from Sam Altman back in, it's like November of 2022, November, December 2022. He said, "We are going to see one-person billion-dollar companies because of AI." And I don't know, initially, like, when he said this quote, like, my initial gut reaction from ChatGPT was like skepticism a little bit of like, this is just NFT with extra steps or whatever, right? And it's like, I don't know. Now we're here. It's been what, 2 years, and it's just getting crazier, right? It's not going away. Like, I think we have all come to the conclusion now that this is not hype. This is not a fad. Right, and there's also some other things that are not hype and not a fad. What other things are not a hype and not a fad? Well, big data definitely isn't, right? I think that's what a lot of y'all are in here for, right? You make great data engineering salaries from doing data processing and figuring out what the actual truth is and making good decisions with big data. And another one is social media and personal brands. I'm sure a lot of y'all have heard of Mr. Beast, right? He has 300 million subscribers, right? He's the most followed person in the world, and he's 4 years younger than me, right? So it's crazy where the world's going. And one of the things that I've found very interesting is the intersections of these trends. I think that bottom circle, the intersection of big data and social media, is the most obvious one. That's where you get, the data engineering influencers. By the way, that's actually a very kind of new trend, and it's really an unsaturated market, by the way. Like, if you look at all the data engineering creators across all platforms, right, there are seven that have over 100,000 followers. There's like 5 million data engineers. So what do we get? Let's like 1 creator per million. Okay, cool. Can my million give me $10? Thank you. And so there's a very unsaturated market there. So that's something I identified in 2022. And then obviously you have the intersection of artificial intelligence and big data. That's where you get ChatGPT, and you get a lot of the, it's no longer just making stuff up. It's actually rooted in facts. And then on the other side, you have spam masters. This is actually something I've leveraged quite a bit in my business. Not to spam people, but I couldn't come up with a better title for this, is like you leverage your brand and artificial intelligence to send out sales emails, like cold emailing people and trying to get people on board, right? But really, what we're here to talk about is actually that intersection of all three, right? Where you combine AI, big data, and social media, and you create a one-person empire. This is something that came to my attention around January of 2023, and it made me realize something very important. That I needed to quit my job. I'd been working at Airbnb for about the last 2 years, and I recognized pretty early on there that AI was gonna create such an opportunity cost, right? Airbnb was paying me great money, like one of the best paying data engineering roles you can get in the entire world. And even with that, I recognized that the opportunity cost of working at Airbnb was too high because of AI. So what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about a couple things. Big thing is around DataExpert, what I have built, the before and after architectures. We've done 4 evolutions of the architecture now. We're going to talk a lot about mistakes I made along the way, because I've made an unbelievable number of mistakes over the last year. So hopefully you guys can learn from me if you're building your own startups. And then last but certainly not least, we're going to talk a little bit about what the future might look like for data engineers. So this is a quick summary of my history. I quit Airbnb in March of 2023 after realizing all the AI stuff. And then pretty quickly I realized that Airbnb was actually paying me pretty well and that I wanted to make some money. So in April, I decided to launch my beta cohort for DataExpert. had 50 students. I intentionally capped it at 50 students because I didn't want to fall on my face in front of hundreds of people. And then, one of the things that you might notice on the slide is that each boot camp has gotten bigger and bigger, kind of following an exponential growth curve, right? 50, 150, 175, 350. And one of the things that happens when you just keep upping the ante with the number of students that you're teaching in parallel is things get more complicated, right? And they get harder to scale. So let's just start off with the basics here. This is when I started my company. I'm a young, scrappy startup. Remember, like, my goal here is to be a one-man business, right? I don't want to have a lot of other people involved. And this is the first version of the architecture. The main thing I did here was I posted a Google form. I was like, do you want to join my bootcamp? And then I went through it, found the candidates, the best people. I hand-selected the first 50 people, sent them invoices. And then once they paid, I manually invited all of them to Discord, GitHub, Google Classroom, and all that stuff. And it was painful, right? That was a painful thing. And in this first version of the bootcamp, we actually used Databricks. And essentially, what we tried to do is have the GitHub had the code and data necessary for Databricks, but then the students needed to take the data from GitHub and put it into Databricks. And we did data lake modeling Postgres, which is kind of strange. Benefits here. Very easy to set up. I set this whole architecture up in like 3 hours, 4 hours, right? One day. No server costs, right? Everything was free. Tons of built-in functionality, by the way. Google Classroom is actually pretty great. It gets you pretty far. I was really surprised by how, for free, I was like, wow, this is pretty awesome. But obviously, there's a lot of drawbacks to this version, right? The Databricks free trial was absolutely horrendous. I'm sure some of y'all have tried the free trial out, and you've noticed that there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes involved with that. With the 50 students that I taught, I was able to get 20 of them up and running with the data in time, which is terrible, right? If I marketed my bootcamp that way, I'm like, hey, I'm able to teach 40% of my students Spark, right? That's not a good statistic. And a Docker, painful setup, right? Because my bootcamp students are some of them are analysts, some of them are software engineers, so some of them really don't like Docker. And I'm never sending out manual invoices ever again. And Google Classroom was limited, and Google Classroom actually had one really, really damning feature. It's the download button. One of the things I realized after finishing my first bootcamp was I found my entire curricula and videos on Pirate Bay 1 week after the bootcamp was over. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't use Google Classroom. That's probably the wrong play. So let's talk about the iterations. So this is V2. This was summer of 23. This is the second bootcamp I launched. This one was able to support 3 times as many students. We went from 50 to 150 students. And I wrote some code. Right? We got a domain, dataengineer.io, a domain that was too expensive. We'll talk about that later. And some of the big things we added here was the big glaring thing for me was that piracy problem. And so we added a gated paywalled access with encrypted streaming from Amazon CloudFront. That was the biggest win from the platform. But I also got rid of Databricks. Didn't want Databricks anymore. We went with Tabular, actually. And I was like, ooh, Tabular is a really promising startup. And guess who also thought that? Databricks. And so I set up my data lake on Tabular. And I still have it on Tabular, by the way. It's great. And we ended up teaching local Spark for the second version of the bootcamp. We also added Heroku Kafka for real-time streaming with Flink. And that was essentially the second architecture. This architecture was great. No more manual invoices. We were able to scale up 150 sales, really ramped it up, made a lot of money. One of the things that I loved about this was there was a day there, June 28th of 2023, I made $100,000 in one day because I made 50 sales. And that was the day I realized I'm never going back to Airbnb because Airbnb, I'm not going to make $100,000 in one day at Airbnb ever. Other things, CloudFront, right? Secure, piracy problems vanish. Then we had a domain, right? You get a lot of benefits from having a domain, like SEO and Google, all that stuff, right? And branding, all those things. We also had a logo. Not this logo. I had I slapped together a logo with Dolly, and it was actually one that was pretty good looking. And I was like, wow, I never need a designer. But then a lot of people were like, Zach, your logo is shit. You need to get a new logo. And then the new logo I have is in the corner of these slides, and I like the one we have now. Okay, risks, right? So in this version, right, we were still doing data lake modeling in Postgres, and that was something that a lot of students found unintuitive because I had to translate a lot of like the SQL and data modeling stuff we were doing in Postgres into Iceberg, into Delta Lake, and it wasn't very intuitive because it's like, why wouldn't I just teach it on that? Server costs weren't zero. They were cheap though, like $200 a month. People didn't like that I moved from Databricks to local Spark because they were like, I want to do real data engineering in the cloud. Data engineering isn't done locally. And then, still manually adding everyone to Discord and GitHub. My assistant did not like that. 150 people. There was actually, we came across this interesting constraint with GitHub. You know that you can only invite 50 people a day to your organization in GitHub? And that actually was a problem in the second bootcamp. And I'm like, GitHub, I promise I'm not like a spammer or like an abuser. I'm not trying to abuse your platform, but just have a successful bootcamp, right? And so those are the risks for this one. So let's check out the third version of this architecture. So this is the third version that we moved to. You'll notice some interesting things here. Postgres is gone, right? So I no longer teach Postgres in my bootcamp because we're all about data lake stuff because that's the future. And you'll notice we add Starburst and Trino. Those are the big additions here. And I actually have Starburst and Trino that query from Next.js. So one of the things that's really cool about my bootcamp and the data modeling weeks is you can actually do the entire data modeling weeks from the phone if you want. It's one of the most accessible boot camps. You don't have to install anything. You can write SQL from Chrome and learn data modeling. And that was really cool. Another big addition here was automatic invitations, right? Made things scale up a lot better, freed up my assistant's time quite a bit. So this version was great. The biggest thing here, the biggest win, was the data lake modeling. We were using Trino. We were using Iceberg. We were using, current state-of-the-art technologies that people loved, and it was just a smash hit. Those weeks when I taught that, very, very good. Automatically adding people, amazing. And one of the other things I recognized was, so when I tried to set up Trino here, one of the things I did was initially I was like, I'm a good engineer. I'm going to use Terraform. I'm going to use AWS Console, right? And one of the things I realized as a one-person company, that is a very stupid thing to do. And the reason for that is that I have to do everything, right? I don't know if you know, but I have to do sales and marketing and a lot of the admin work and the front end work and the back end work, right? There's a lot of work to be done here. And the one piece of work that I definitely don't want to do is DevOps, right? DevOps is not what I want to do, right? And so it's like, why not use a service for that, right? That was something that really opened my eyes because I actually ate a lot of time to that. I probably ate at least a couple weeks of development time. And then I realized, oh, I can just delete all this and use a service. And that was amazing. And this version still had some risks. I kept Spark local in this version, and so people they didn't like it as much as it could be. And another thing was I had a vision, because I really wanted to show people a way to do Kafka to Flink to Iceberg, right? So that you can see real-time data landing in the lake. And that was something I really wanted to show my students, and we weren't able to pull that off. We kept it to be, in this version of the bootcamp, we kept it to be Kafka to Flink to Postgres, which was really strange. But we still were able to teach all the real-time stuff, just not that last data lake step. And in this version of the bootcamp, I cranked up the homework assignments. There was 15 homework assignments for each student, about 200 students. So there's 3,000 homework assignments to grade. It's a lot. When that was happening, I was like, well, I solved that problem just by hiring people, hired my old students. Hired 20 of my old students to each grade 150 assignments. And that's what we did. And that was not great, actually, because those 20 people, keeping them consistent, keeping them timely, and getting the feedback loop tight, impossible. Just too many moving parts. And that was something that I had to think about for the next version of the bootcamp and try to figure out how to because I want to have a small company. I want to have few employees and few things. So let's talk about the current iteration. So this is the current iteration of my bootcamp. You'll see there was a gap between V3 and V4. So this, you'll notice there's a lot more things added here because I had 6 months to where I wasn't working on a bootcamp. So I was able to add a lot of things. A couple things here that I want to call out because remember, don't roll stuff yourself, use services. That's what I want to talk about first. In that bottom left corner, you'll see makes an account, and then with clerk is the new thing. So in March of this year, I wasted 3 weeks of my life because I rolled my own authentication system. And then a script kiddie abused my sign-up form, sent out 70,000 phishing emails, and I thought my domain reputation was doomed. And that was when I realized, like, why do I care about authentication at all? Like, why is this something that I'm even worried about? This is, again, a place where my, like, oh, I'm a technical engineer, I can do anything, bit me in the ass, right? Because that's not the case. And so I spent 3 weeks migrating my auth system to Clerk. And now I never have to think about it ever again. And I know that Clerk has it handled for me. Other things, we were able to add subscriptions to this, which dropped the entry point for my bootcamp by an order of magnitude, so which allowed a lot more people to learn from me. Other very important things here is we added AWS Glue for Spark and Spark streaming, and that actually allowed us to finally get that vision of Kafka to streaming job to Iceberg. We were able to finally get that vision realized. Another big thing that you might see, there's actually a ChatGPT integration here. We noticed that homework grading doesn't have to be done by a human most of the time. And so we were able to create, kind of a system that allowed us to dramatically reduce the complexity for our homework and grading. So this system, benefits, right? We moved from Heroku to Confluent, which is great, because now our students can have their own topics. In the previous boot camps, everyone just dumped all their events to one topic, and it was just a nasty thing, because Heroku Kafka doesn't let you have more topics. You just have like one, and it's $200 a month. Gigantic ripoff, don't use it. And Confluent's great. You can have like a lot of them, and it's like cheaper. So that's awesome. Actually letting my students use Astronomer to deploy in the cloud and have capstone projects of things that are actually running in the cloud was another thing that was like, wow, this is real data engineering now. This is not like some local toy example. This is real. Other things, automatic homework grading was amazing, because in the fourth bootcamp, we had 350 students, right? So there was like about 5,000, 6,000 assignments, and ChatGPT reduced the complexity there by an order of magnitude, because it got it right 90% of the time. And then the other 10%, hire someone. So in the third bootcamp, right, I had to have 20 graders. In my fourth bootcamp, I had 2. And this is while adding twice as many students. So this is an example of where AI saved me, tens of thousands of dollars. Because instead of paying those graders, now it's like I can pay ChatGPT, and it's like maybe $100 versus tens of thousands of dollars for a human to do it. So risks, there's a bunch of them. One of them is removing Docker made some students mad. It made me recognize that my bootcamp needs to have a couple segments to it, because there's some data engineers that come from a software engineering background, and they want to be more like data platform guys. And then there's data engineers that come from an analyst background who never want to touch Docker ever. And so it's kind of a balancing act. And that was a big thing I recognized. Another thing was inadequate access controls. So when I set up Glue, I just gave everyone the same key. One of the things that happened there was one of my students, he ran a job, it cost like $1,500, right? And that's his entire tuition, right? And I'm like, thanks, bro, thanks. And one of the things I recognized there is I need to do something similar to what I do with GitHub and Discord. When someone signs up, they get issued a new key. And then you can, in AWS, you can actually set limits for people. So then you have it on a per student basis. You can automatically track their costs. So I don't have to have that problem anymore. But when you only have one key, there's nothing you can do, right? Or you can only set some global limit that has to be pretty high. And another thing, just like with anything with AI, right? You have hallucinations, right? Because when I do the automatic grading, I have it give me a pass-fail and a confidence score of like how confident it is about that grade. And sometimes ChatGPT is confidently wrong. I'm sure you all have experienced that before. And in those cases, one of the things we recognize is the onus is on the student to raise that, right? Where it's like ChatGPT is like, this is definitely wrong, and the student has to go and talk to us and be like, no, it's definitely right, and then we have to like kind of go through that. And that's something that we're trying to fiddle with. I know that there's a way to do that with like fine tuning that can probably make those problems kind of go away as we get more and more examples. So let's talk about mistakes. Big mistake here. I made a big mistake in the second bootcamp when I bought DataEngineer.io. That domain was $8,000. I actually feel grateful about this because I was debating between 2 domains. I was debating between DataEngineer.io and DataEngineering.com. DataEngineering.com is $100,000. So I'm very happy that I made a mistake of an order of magnitude less. Why is this a mistake? Because DataEngineer.io is not an accessible brand to people who don't want to be data engineers. If you want to be an analytics engineer, data scientist, machine learning engineer, maybe there's all these other roles that are going to work. That's why I intentionally switched to data expert, because data expert is intentionally vague and more accessible. And the main lesson here is don't make big purchasing decisions without thinking about the implications in 1, 3, 5 years of like where your business is going. Because I bought it impulsively because I was like, I'm the data engineering guy. A lot of you guys probably know me as the data engineering guy. And so that was something that I recognized as a pretty big mistake throughout this journey. Other mistakes. Crying in AWS console for days. I was struggling because I was trying to learn the art of being an entrepreneur, because I've been an entrepreneur for 18 months. I was a big tech engineer for 8 years. And I pride myself on my technical ability, right? So it's like, why use a SaaS product? I can just build it, right? And that's something that is, frankly, as a one-person company, is stupid, because you want to be able to open up your time to the highest leverage opportunities. And my highest leverage opportunities are talking to you out here, making content, doing sales, and doing boot camps. Those are the main things, right? And then, so writing code and building out my own stuff, I should be minimizing that as much as possible. Other mistakes, not researching. So I just want to talk a little bit about CloudFront. So initially, I actually wrote my own streaming APIs, my own video streaming APIs, because I thought I could do it better than Amazon, right? Which is, again, bold, but dumb, right? Again, I tried to set up Trino with Terraform and do all the crazy DevOps stuff. Again, and Heroku Kafka. Confluent was a choice, and I just didn't think about it because I deployed my app through Heroku, right? My Next.js app was deployed through Heroku, and I was like, oh, Heroku has Kafka, let's just use that, right? And I didn't even think about it. I was just like, it was the closest and easiest option, and I didn't do any research at all, right? And there was at least 5 other times where I made this same mistake, right? So the main point here is do a little bit of research. Look before you leap. Just think about what some other options are before you just dive into code. Another one, not using AI sooner. One of the big things that I recognize is AI has changed my development processes. It's probably changed a lot of your development processes as well. One of the things I've recognized is that there's kind of a rule for me with AI. If you're trying to write something that is more than 5 lines of code, but less than 200, that is where AI has a sweet spot. That's where AI is most likely going to be better. Because if it's less than 5 lines of code, just write it yourself. Just write the line yourself. Just write it yourself. If it's more than 200, the problem there is that you're going to probably run into debugging problems, because it's going to get something wrong once you get to a certain number of lines of code. Once you get to a certain level of complexity, AI kind of messes things up. Things might change though. That rule might change as AIs get better. But my whole point is, I was still writing 30, 50, 70 line functions that really I should just prompt and plug and chug and go, and it will double or triple your development speed. That was something that would have built this platform even faster. I remember when I was building out my Stripe payment gateway, that was something that I built with AI, and I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it because I scoped the problem as a 4-week problem. With AI, I built in 2 days, right? And then I just published it for sales, and I was like, is this going to work? Because it just felt like it wasn't going to work, because I was like, why was this so easy? And it worked. It was great. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This actually works great. So definitely learn that AI is the future, and you need to be leveraging it as much as possible. Not using AI today is like not using Google. So we're going to shift gears here a little bit, talk about the future of data engineering and AI. So there's going to be 3 things here that I really think are, when I was at Airbnb, my last 5-6 months at Airbnb, these were the 3 areas that I found to be very, very powerful for my workflows. So one of the things that, especially right when ChatGPT came out, everyone was talking about how, SQL is dead, text to SQL is the future. And, one of the things you got to know about text to SQL is that English is an inherently ambiguous language, and SQL is not, right? So one of the things you got to realize is that, text to SQL is never going to be great, because it's trying to map an imprecise language onto a precise language, and that's just not going to work. Especially once you get to a certain level of complexity, it doesn't work, right? It might work for, a 5-line SQL statement with a group by, but once you get to anything with a CTE or nesting, good luck. What I did find AI is amazing for is boilerplate. So if you know your analytical patterns, like cumulative tables, slowly changing dimensions, and write, audit, publish, it can give you a nice Airflow DAG with a lot of like boilerplate that you just have to kind of fill in the little bits of details. Another place I love it for is data quality checks. Because every time I like finish a pipeline and I'm like, all right, time to put in the data quality checks. I'm like, all right, I got the non-empty check. I got the no duplicates check. And then I'm like, there's like 3 or 4 I need to add. And I'm like, what are these checks? And ChatGPT actually does give you pretty good suggestions. As long as you give it enough business context, it gives you pretty good suggestions. Other areas, context building, right? Because RAG is the future, right? If you're building RAG models, that's what I use for the grading, right? For the homework grading, I use RAG. And there's three types of context building that you need to reduce the hallucination rate of LLM. One is vector database. This is going to be where you have any sort of unstructured content, especially text content. It's very good. Graph database, this is going to be anytime you have any nouns or entities or relationships that you need to look up and bring in any other contextual information that way. And relational databases, this one is like, I don't know, it doesn't, like people don't give it enough credit because I feel it's not fancy, but like keyword search is still great for LLM. If you want to do keyword search to get your RAG documents and your RAG data, it works great. You don't have to bring in Pinecone all the time. You don't have to always bring in the new fancy stuff. You can just use Postgres. Agents. This is probably, of everything, the area that I find to be the most exciting development for data engineering. If you Google data engineer burnout, just Google that sometime. It's interesting numbers. Something like 80% of data engineers are experiencing burnout. And this is the #1 reason. Like for me, when I worked at Netflix, right, from July 2019 until March of 2020, I was on call for 9 months. And that was a lot. That was why I quit. Well, I'm done. I don't want to work at this company anymore. Like, if you guys don't want to help me, right, then I'm done, right? And one of the things that I learned from that process was there's 2 types of issues that happen in on-call that are dumb, that we don't need to worry about. One is false positives, which happen a lot. If you use data quality checks, you've all experienced a false positive in your data quality check where you're like, oh, no, that's wrong. Or it's like right within the threshold and you're like, okay, it's benign, and then you just let the pipeline go on. That kind of logic and reasoning is something that LLM will be able to do because it's not that complicated. And the other one is Spark, right? Whenever Spark has like the data shape changes just a little bit and then Spark runs out of memory. And you're like, all right, I got to bump up the memory. And why do I have to do this at 3 a.m.? Why can't an LLM do this? Right? And I find that this is going to give data engineers a mental health boost. It's going to give data engineers, because I've always found like when I'm a data engineer, every pipeline I write is another pipeline I have to maintain. And it feels like I'm slowly building like a wall of my own demise, right? Because I'm essentially, like, every incremental pipeline means another false positive, another out of memory, right? And I think this is one area where LLM is going to dramatically increase our ability to maintain pipelines and our mental health. So, in conclusion, the opportunity in front of us is massive. AI is the future. You can build, you can make things that are quite amazing. And the time is now to build. The time is now to create something amazing. Thank you, everyone.